parents skipped my graduation to take my brother to a concert. He deserves it more, they said. I just took my framed diploma and left. This morning they were on my doorstep begging when I opened the door this morning to the people who taught me how to walk, how to tie my shoes, how to apologize, though apparently not how to show up when it actually mattered. They stood there like ghosts, Mom with tear-streaked cheeks and Dad holding his breath like he was swallowing pride for the first time in years. For a moment I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than anything they could have rehearsed in the car. And that's how we start. Not with fireworks or a final confrontation, but with a quiet doorway and everything unsaid hanging in the air like humidity. Rewind. Let's go back 24 hours. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, adjusting the folds of my graduation stole, thinking about all the nights I'd spent in that same room after a shift at the gas station or wiping grease off my arms after closing the diner at midnight. I worked. I studied. I barely slept. I sacrificed so much for this day, telling myself it would all be worth it, that when I stood on that stage, they'd finally see me. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Hey, sweetie. Change of plans? We can't make it today. Adam got front row tickets to that band he loves. We can't miss it, he deserves it more after the year he's had. No apology. No explanation. Just he deserves it more. I stared at that message for a solid 5 minutes. Not because I was confused, but because I wasn't. That was the worst part. I wasn't surprised. It was just another tally on a long list of Adam comes first. Adam, the eternal prodigy. The boy who quit piano after 2 months but still got a recital party. The kid who failed algebra and got a tutor and a new video game to encourage him. The one who wrecked Dad's car last year, then got a newer one a month later. Because he needed it to find work. He still doesn't have a job. And me? I passed on parties, internships, road trips. I scraped together tuition with financial aid, side gigs, and scholarships they never even asked me about. My GPA sat at 3.8, my resume had real grit on it, and my biggest cheerleaders were my professors and a barista named Glenn who knew when I needed espresso over pity. I texted back one word, okay. Not, I understand. Not, thanks anyway. Just okay. Because I'd learned not to expect them to understand what they were doing. I walked to the ceremony alone. No crowd, no camera, no one in the stands holding a sign with my name in glitter. I sat between a girl whose whole family had flown in from Texas and a guy whose parents were cheering so loudly I almost cried for him. Not because I was jealous, but because it made me realize how numb I'd gone. When my name was called, I stepped onto that stage, took the diploma with a steady hand, and smiled for the camera like I was taught. I even shook the dean's hand like I was proud. But inside? I was hollow. Not angry. Not sad. Just done. After the ceremony, I didn't wait around for photos or the obligatory post-grad brunch. I just walked home, carrying the frame like it was breakable glass. In a way, it was. It held 4 years of silence, of being overlooked, of telling myself this was the day it would change. I put the frame on the kitchen table. I stared at it for a long time. And then I did the one thing I hadn't done in years. I let myself feel it. The betrayal. The fatigue. The quiet grief of being invisible in your own family. And then I slept. Like a man who had finally stopped running. The knock came just after sunrise. That awkward, urgent rhythm of people who aren't sure whether they're welcome. I opened the door to find them standing there. Mom clutching her purse like it was a shield, Dad with Adam a few steps behind, trying to look remorseful but mostly looking bored. They were still dressed in the clothes from the concert. I noticed the wristbands. VIP access. Sweetheart, we didn't realize, Mom began, her voice already cracking. You looked so happy in the photos Adam posted. Dad added, trying to sound like he was building a bridge. We thought maybe it wasn't a big deal. That line hit harder than any slap. Not a big deal. That's what they thought my graduation was. No streamers? I asked. No flowers? No post-ceremony we're so proud of you dinner? Nothing? They shifted uncomfortably. Mom reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said quietly. Just don't. You don't understand, she said quickly. Adam had been looking forward to that concert for months. He's had such a rough year. We just wanted to give him something to look forward to. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how perfectly it all lined up with every moment I tried to forget. You remember when I got accepted into the honors program? I asked. They looked blank. Of course, Mom said cautiously. That was years ago. You didn't come to the induction, I reminded them. Said it conflicted with Adam's soccer banquet, which he didn't even show up to. Dad frowned. That's ancient history. I nodded. Right. Like when I got the summer internship in D.C.? The one I had to turn down because you said you couldn't help with travel costs. A week later you bought Adam a drum set he never used. They didn't speak. Adam looked like he wanted to disappear. Good. You've been telling me he's had a hard year for a decade now, I said. What about mine? I worked full-time nights while pulling a double major. I cried into ramen noodles more times than I can count. I gave up everything to finish school. You gave up my graduation for a concert. Mom's eyes brimmed with tears. We made a mistake. No, I corrected her. You made a choice. They stood in silence after that. For once, no one rushed to fill the air. I think it scared them, that stillness, the way I spoke without shouting, the way I stood there not begging or breaking, just done. You're blowing this out of proportion, Dad said eventually. His voice had that edge, the same one he used when I tried to stand up for myself as a kid. Am I? I asked. Because when you told me Adam deserved it more, that wasn't the first time. That was just the first time you said it out loud. Adam spoke then. Come on, man, it wasn't personal. I looked at him. You got a standing ovation when you passed your GED on the third try. They bought balloons and a steak dinner. When I got a full scholarship, they mailed me a card, late. He flinched, and I didn't stop. You've been the center of this family since we were kids. And maybe that made sense when we were young and you needed more attention. But then I kept growing, and you didn't. And they never noticed the difference. Dad stepped forward. You think we didn't notice your hard work? We're proud of you, son. I shook my head. Pride without presence means nothing. You missed the biggest day of my life to scream lyrics in a stadium. You picked the noise over the silence I've been drowning in for years. Mom looked desperate now. We're here. We're trying. Please, can't we just move past this? That was the moment. The moment I realized they still didn't get it. They wanted to skip to forgiveness like you skip to the chorus of a song you only half remember. I stepped aside, not to let them in, but to make it clear. No, I said. You don't get to stand in this doorway and ask for grace without first walking through everything you ignored. You don't get to show up now and pretend this is reparable. You think this is about one missed graduation? I said, my voice low, deliberate. It's not. This is about every time I was second place in my own family. I looked at Adam again, still no apology in his eyes. Just discomfort. Guilt maybe, but too faint to matter. Remember the science fair? I continued. 7th grade. I won regionals. You didn't come to the awards because Adam had a dentist appointment. I had a cavity. Adam muttered. I ignored him. Or when I got that job offer in another state. I needed help moving, just a few boxes. You said no because Adam wanted to host his friends for a life-changing game night. I didn't know. Mom whispered. You didn't ask. I replied. You never asked? Never checked in. Never saw me unless it was through the lens of how it affected him. Dad tried again. We thought you were fine. You always seemed to have it handled. I did, I said. Because I had no choice. They stood in the doorway of my apartment, looking smaller than they ever had in their own home. And in that moment something shifted. I wasn't their son trying to be seen. I was a man in his own place, with his own name on the lease, who had built something out of scraps and silence. And they were just people. People who had forgotten how to love someone they didn't have to rescue. I'm not angry, I told them. Not like I used to be. That burned out a long time ago. Now? I'm just done. Done? Mom echoed. Her face was pale. What do you mean? I looked her in the eye, not cruelly, not coldly, just clearly. I mean, you're not part of the life I'm building. Not anymore. Mom gasped, as if the words physically struck her. You don't mean that. I nodded slowly. I do. Adam stepped forward, trying to act like the peacemaker. You can't just cut off your family, man. I'm not cutting you off, I said. I'm finally recognizing the truth. I've always been on my own. I just stopped pretending otherwise. Dad scoffed, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. So what now? You just erase us? After everything? Everything? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You mean the birthday cards signed in a rush? The we're too busy texts? The seats you left empty yesterday? That's your everything? He looked away, jaw clenched. Good. Let it sting. I didn't get here because of you, I said. I got here despite you. And I've carried the weight of being invisible long enough. Mom's voice cracked. But we're your parents. And what does that mean to you? I asked. A title? A default right to show up only when it's convenient? Being a parent isn't a claim, it's a commitment. You walked out of that a long time ago. For a second, no one spoke. Just the hum of the hallway outside and the clock ticking behind me. Then Mom stepped forward again, her eyes wide with something halfway between panic and pleading. Please, can we just talk about this? Try to fix it? I shook my head. This isn't a movie. There's no dramatic reunion where we all cry and make up over coffee. This is real life. And in real life, people face consequences. They stared at me like they didn't know me. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they never did. I stepped back into my apartment, hand on the edge of the door. I looked at them one last time, not with hatred, not even with anger. Just release. You made your choices, I said. Now I'm making mine. Then, gently, like setting down a burden, I closed the door. The click of the latch echoed louder than any argument we could have had. I stood there for a second, hands still resting on the doorknob, as if expecting them to knock again, to shout, to force their way back into the narrative. They didn't. Just footsteps shuffling away, muffled voices down the hall, a slow descent of presence fading. I turned back to my apartment. Sparse, quiet, but mine. A small bookshelf I built during finals week. A sofa I bought secondhand but restored like it was an antique. My framed diploma on the kitchen table, still catching the soft light through the blinds. It looked better without them near it. It looked earned. I sat down on the couch, hands clasped between my knees. I expected to feel some sort of triumph, or a rush of adrenaline for finally saying what I'd bottled up for years. But what I felt was clean. Like someone had opened a window in a dusty house. The thing is, people think anger is loud. That it's slamming doors and shouted accusations and broken dishes. But the deepest kind of anger is quiet. It's control. It's choosing to walk away with your dignity intact, while they're still trying to understand what went wrong. What they never grasped was that it wasn't just one moment that broke me. It was death by 1,000 dismissals. The little ones, the subtle ones. The way they always introduced Adam first at family dinners. The way my milestones were footnotes while his tantrums were headlines. I grew up measuring love in millimeters and rationing my voice like it cost extra. And yesterday should have been mine. It was supposed to be the one day where the applause was mine, the camera lens pointed at me, not past me. Instead, they gave their cheers to a crowd of strangers and a stage Adam didn't earn. But they came back, didn't they? You might say that counts for something. No. What counts is who stays when the crowd is gone. Who shows up when the confetti falls. What counts is presence, not apology. So I sat there, diploma beside me, coffee warming my palms, and realized, this was the first morning of my new life. One with boundaries. One where silence doesn't mean submission. One where my worth isn't a reflection of how much space Adam takes up, but a spotlight I've earned on my own terms. That morning unraveled slowly, like I finally had permission to take up time in my own life. No calls. No texts. No guilt waiting in the corner like it always did after I stood up for myself. I made breakfast, nothing fancy, just eggs and toast, but I cooked it like it mattered. Like I was feeding someone worth feeding. I sat down at the tiny kitchen table and looked at the diploma again. For a moment, I let my thoughts drift, not forward but back. Back to nights studying in the campus library until 2 a.m., headphones in, surrounded by students whose parents brought them coffee and checked in. Mine didn't even ask what classes I was taking. Back to the time I made the dean's list 3 semesters in a row, and when I told my parents, Dad grunted, "That's good," while scrolling on his phone. Back to the group project I carried alone, the job applications, the interviews, the 100 tiny decisions that built the man I had to become, because no one else was going to build him for me. I remembered one specific winter, sophomore year. The heating in my apartment was broken, and I didn't have money to fix it. I wore gloves while writing papers, typing through numb fingers. When I called home, not to ask for help, just to talk, Mom answered and said, "Can I call you back? We're at Adam's open mic night." She never called back. Adam played 3 songs out of tune, but still got a standing ovation. That was their version of effort, loud applause for mediocrity, silence for struggle. The favoritism wasn't new. But what had changed, what I finally recognized, was that I didn't need their recognition anymore. I had spent most of my life auditioning for a role I was never cast in, the son who mattered. And in that quiet kitchen, with butter melting into toast and my name printed in gold on that diploma, I realized something simple and profound. I matter. Not because they say so, but because I kept going when no one clapped. Because I earned everything they forgot to see. So, I started packing. Not because I was running from them, but because I was moving towards something better. I had accepted a job offer in Seattle a few weeks prior, high risk, high reward, everything I wanted. I had delayed the decision, unsure if I could really start over somewhere new. Now, the hesitation was gone. The freedom of finally severing that invisible thread between me and their expectations. It made the decision feel like air rushing into a sealed room. I boxed up the things that mattered: books, notebooks filled with scribbles and goals, letters from professors, a photo of me and my best friend who'd cheered louder than my parents ever had. I left behind anything tied to their version of me. By noon, I had called the leasing office. By evening, I had a moving van scheduled. The weight of years slid off my shoulders in the click of a confirmation email. They wouldn't follow me. I knew that. Not because they couldn't, but because deep down, they didn't know how. And that's what made the choice final. Not dramatic. Not cruel. Just necessary. It was 2 days before the move when the letter came. Not a text. Not a voicemail. A letter, in Mom's handwriting, loopy, careful, like she drafted it a dozen times. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity has a way of prying into wounds, and I figured I owed myself closure if nothing else. Inside were 4 pages. 4 pages trying to rewrite the past with passive regret and selective memory. She wrote about how hard it was to raise 2 boys so different. How Adam had always needed more attention, more patience, more support. How she and Dad thought I was strong, so they leaned on that strength and didn't realize how much it cost me. She said things like, "We thought we were doing our best, and I'm sorry if it ever felt like we didn't care." If. That word stuck in my throat like a stone. If it felt like they didn't care? It wasn't a feeling. It was a fact. It was an absence that lived in my bones. A quiet so loud it followed me into adulthood. She ended it with, "Please don't leave us behind. We're trying now." Doesn't that count for something? I set the letter down, not angry. Just exhausted. Because yes, trying counts. But timing matters. And you don't get to set fire to someone's world then show up with a bucket after the house is ash. I didn't write back. Instead, I finished packing. Filled the last box with photos of my own choosing, moments that I defined as important. No holidays, no birthdays where I stood in Adam's shadow. Just snapshots of me and the people who chose me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Friends who showed up to study sessions and cheered at thesis presentations. Professors who knew my name and saw my effort. A neighbor who once brought me soup during finals week. That was my family. The real one. The morning of the move, I left the letter on the kitchen counter with a post-it that simply read, "Timing matters. Don't let that be something you only understand when it's too late." Then I locked the door behind me. Not in anger, but with clarity. Seattle greeted me not with fanfare, but with rain, and oddly, that felt right. I drove into the city with the last of my things packed neatly into the trunk, the framed diploma riding shotgun like a quiet witness to everything I'd left behind. As I crossed into my new neighborhood, something loosened in my chest. Not relief exactly. More like release. Like the tension I'd carried for years had finally exhaled. My new apartment wasn't big. But the windows were wide and the walls didn't echo with the ghosts of favoritism. I built shelves. I laid down a rug. I hung up a calendar and filled it not with reminders to impress, but with plans to live. I filled the silence with music of my own choosing. The first night, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the puddles below, and I didn't feel lost. I felt found. They never called again. Not after the letter, not after the post-it. Maybe they were waiting for me to cool down, to come back around like I always did. But this time I didn't. Because this time, the silence was mine. Not something forced on me, but something I owned. I don't know if they ever understood the full weight of what they did. The ceremonies they skipped, the support they withheld, the birthdays where I clapped for myself. But understanding isn't a requirement for healing. Distance is. And I chose distance like a man stepping out of the fog and into clarity. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt invisible in your own home, let me say what maybe no one ever said to you. You're not crazy for noticing the difference. You're not bitter for remembering it. And you're not cruel for choosing peace over proximity. Sometimes the loudest revenge isn't rage. It's calm. It's deliberate. It's the sound of a door closing, not just on the conversation, but on the chapter. And sometimes, that's the sound of a life beginning.